Good morning. My name is Linda Botkin, and my husband and I host the Motorcycle Affinity Group that meets the second Sunday of every month here in the parking lot after the second service. So y'all come if you ride. Come join us, bring a friend. Please stand for today's reading. Today's passage is 1 Samuel 9:27 through 10:1. As they were going down to the outskirts of the city, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to pass on before us, and when he has passed on, stop here yourself for a while, that I may make known to you the word of God." Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, "Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies. And this shall be the sign to you that the Lord has anointed you to be prince over his heritage." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Good morning. Welcome. We're glad that you're here to continue in our study through the book of 1 Samuel together today. So could you turn to someone around you? You've already welcomed them, and say to them, or ask them this question. Ask them, are you convinced? Ask them that for a moment. Are you convinced? Now, the other person's going to say, of what, right? Are you convinced that God is sovereign? Ask them that. Are you convinced that God is sovereign? Interesting question, right? Some of you are afraid to ask that in church, correct? Yeah, you're just like, okay, I don't know if I want to ask this or not because this is a holy place and God is here, and so I'm not sure I want to ask that. Well, I want to talk for a few moments, longer than a few moments, right? Let's be honest with that, right? Talk for a while about this, of the sovereignty of God and how it works in our life as we explore 1 Samuel chapter 9 together. And so I want to start out by reading 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1 is where we're going to begin, yes. And then we're going to go way back in our book, 1 Samuel, to chapter 1 and verse 1. And then I want to show you something which I believe that is, to me, is profound about God and how God works. And as we explore this understanding of the sovereignty of God as well. So 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, let me start there because we need to kind of get on with this because we have quite a bit to cover together in our study today. So 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. He was the son of Abel, son of Zeror, and of Becrath, and the son of Aphiah, and a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. I figured I'd get all the names out right at the front, right? Get those away. We don't have to worry about those anymore as well. And we have to start there because, yes, we're studying chapter 9. But we look at verses like that and we kind of brush over them. And we say, well, there's great information. And, I don't know exactly why I would need all those names and how it's put together. But that's wonderful. That's good. Let's get on with like the real stuff, the stuff that is relevant to me and to my life. But what I want to say to you before we go to chapter 1, verse 1, is that what we see here is a transition. We see this powerful transition starting at chapter 9 of away from Samuel as being that of the judge of Israel to that of Saul being the king of Israel. So there's a very transitional chapter that we're starting in this morning, but I want to show you something about structure for a moment. So if you go back to chapter 1 and verse 1, there was a certain man of Ramathaim, Zephohim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. He was the son of Jehoahim, the son of Elihu, son of Tohu, the son of Zeph, and an Ephraimite. And so when you look at this, and Mark, I don't understand what all those means, other than you just like spit out a whole bunch of biblical words that I'll never use again probably in my life. But when you see those two verses, they're very much alike, aren't they? The way he starts out the book in chapter 1, verse 1, and then the way he transitions in chapter 9 and verse 1, they're very similar in God's approach to this. And I thought, well, Mark, what does that really mean? And why are they like that? Yes, it's a transition from Samuel to Saul, but I think there's something greater to understand about God as we start this study and talk about the sovereignty of the Lord this morning. That God is a God of order. Understand this. When you read these verses together, you realize that God is a powerful God of order is what he is. And he's providential in all of his ways. That these verses contain nothing random. And I think when we go through this story together and we study Saul, that to realize that there's nothing random about the things that we're going to read and the things that take place within his life as well. There's nothing random about these verses. The events may be common. They may be some very common events in these verses, but they are not random at all. And what we're going to experience together as we embark on this journey through Saul's life is we're going to see divine direction and the sovereignty of God as his hand moves in the life of Israel and that in the life of Samuel and Saul as well. So we're at a transition. It's a new day in the nation of Israel, yet they're still the same people with the same struggles, the same hangups, the same issues. You can give them a king, you can give them 50 kings, and they're still going to be the same people as well. And so I think that's the way we have to approach all of this. So let me give you some background to kind of build out the context for chapter 9. It's chapter 8, verse 4, and it says, "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together. They came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, 'Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations.'" So here's a thought this morning, as the reason I ask you to ask each person that question. Do I live convinced? And I put the word in there intentionally. Do I live convinced that God is sovereign and providential? Because I think we can use those words. We can sing those songs. We can say, oh, today is Reformation Sunday, so it's perfect to talk about the sovereignty of God on this day as part of that of Reformed theology. So we're going to talk about the sovereignty of God. But are you convinced? Do you live like you're convinced that God is sovereign over all the moments of your life and he's providential in all of his ways? You see, Israel has asked God for a king due to Samuel's age and the dysfunction of his two sons. So they have a leadership issue. We've talked about this before. And so it's a very valid reason they're asking for a king. So that's not the issue. That's not the issue at all. They've asked for a king before. After Gideon in the book of Judges defeats the Midianites, they ask Gideon to be their king, and he respectfully declines as well. It's not that God does not want them to have a king. It's a kind of king that they desire, because what he says, or what they ask Samuel in chapter 8 and verse 5, like all the nations. They want a king like all the other nations, not like a king that God would spell out for them in Deuteronomy chapter 17. They don't want a king who would simply be an upholder of the law of God, and that be a spokesman for God as well, and always point them to God as a higher authority. No, they want a king like all the other nations, and that is the issue. So what does God do as being sovereign? God instructs Samuel to obey the wishes of the people and give them what they want. And that's what he says, to give them what they want. Even though it's not God's timing nor God's desire for them to have this kind of king, he says, Samuel, give them what they want. And then Samuel warns them. We talked about this last week in chapter 8. He warns them of all the things that are going to happen in their life if they choose a king like all the other nations. He was saying to them that what's going to happen is that you're not going to gain the freedom that you think you're going to gain, but you're actually going to lose your freedom. So what this king is going to do, he's going to take your sons and they're going to become warriors is what they're going to be. And many of you are going to lose your sons in battle. He's going to take your daughters and they're going to become his servants as well. So he warns them, yet it doesn't persuade them. And so we know that from last week was a type and a shadow of sin. That anytime we submit ourselves ultimately to anything other than God, then when we think we're going to win freedom, we actually find ourselves in slavery and bondage, is what we understand from all of that, as 1 Samuel is highly filled with that of shadows and symbols of other things as well. So we find ourselves again back in chapter 8, then verse 19. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." How quickly, right, they forget who simply put the Philistines to flight. It was God. It was not them. So what this comes down to is an element, a struggle, an issue with trust. This is a trust issue for them and who they trust in, and they would rather have a physical king they trust in other than God. Verse 21 says this, "And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them to the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, 'Obey their voice and make them a king.' And Samuel then said to the men of Israel, 'Go every man to his city.'" Let me frame this for you before we move on in our discussion this morning about what God is doing. And to really get this, I found this text in the book Hosea, chapter 13, and it's verse 11. And these are the words of God. It says, "I gave you a king in my anger." Look what he says. "I gave you a king in my anger, and I took him away in my wrath." Frame this correctly, because the appointment of a king for Israel is not a blessing. Realize this, but understand that this is a form of judgment from the Lord. This is what God is doing. We need to realize this as well. And when I put this together with the sovereignty of God, I find God being amazingly sovereign and providential in both his blessings in our life and his judgment over our lives, his that of his discipline over our lives as well. And so Samuel responds by sending the elders back to their own homes as well. So here is my thought then. So how do you and I, how do we navigate a space like this when God calls you to do something against your, and I use the word limited because truly that our understanding and judgment is very limited, against your limited, better judgment? Because I put myself in Samuel's shoes. I mean, Samuel is a prophet and a judge, but Samuel is human like you and I. Samuel knows already from God how this is going to shake out in the end. He knows all of this, but then God comes to him and says, "Obey the wishes of the people, do what they've asked you to do, and give them a king." How do you do that? The only way you can do that is to be totally convinced without any doubt that God is sovereign and God is in control and God knows what he's doing. That's the only way that I think you could do that, right? Because you know how it's going to end. Listen, Samuel loves Israel. He loves the people. He does. He is a judge and a prophet. So his heart is for what is best for Israel. He speaks blessing, and he also speaks that of judgment over them because he personally loves them. So how do you do this? How do you do this in the life of someone that you care about and you love when God tells you to do that and you know the end results of all of this and the pain that's going to cause in their life because you are completely convinced that God is sovereign and God knows exactly what he's doing? Have you been there? If you walk with God long enough, you're going to be there at some point, where there's going to be a moment where you have to walk away from a relationship. There's going to be a moment where you have to have a difficult conversation with someone. There's going to be a moment where you don't understand what God is doing. You don't know why God is doing this. There's a lot of pain in the middle of what is happening maybe in your life. And I say, well, God, I just don't get all of this and what is happening. Then you fall back on this, that you are convinced that God is sovereign over all things. So here is the question then for all of us in the room. And I didn't know how to really phrase the question well, but I just put it in my own words. How heavily do you lean into God's sovereignty? How heavily do you do that? Because we know there's no partial sovereignty. It doesn't exist. If you put partial with the word sovereignty, then it cancels out the word sovereignty. It does. So there's no such thing. It doesn't exist. So how heavily do you lean into God's sovereignty? I think that's a big question that we should really ask ourselves this morning as we work through this teaching. Because I think it takes some leaning to process this kind of situation. It had to for Samuel. There had to be moments where he had these private moments where he's saying, God, in his own mind, Lord, I know, and we can read in some imagination, as long as we're not changing that of the ultimate meaning of the text, he had to think, God, is this really what you want me to say to them? And you really want me to appoint them? You want me to be the guy that's going to dump oil over this cat's head, right? And appoint him as king over your nation when I know that this is not going to end well for them, because you're leaning in heavily to the sovereignty of God. So I thought about a proverb. And so a proverb, Proverbs 3 verse 5 says this, and maybe you've heard it, maybe it's your first time. Hear these words from the Lord this morning for your life. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Remember what God had told Samuel a few weeks ago to say to Israel, return to me with what? What was it? With all of your heart. Well, here we find in the book of Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not lean. By the word lean, write the word trust. Same word as well. Do not lean or trust on your own understanding. This is about leaning heavily into God's sovereignty and not my own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths, it says. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn from evil. But look at verse 8, because I think that a lot of times when we think through submitting to God in this way, submitting to God's sovereignty within my life, that it's nothing but just a path to a lot of pain and to a lot of heartache and a lot of self-denial and just a lot of real issues and uncomfortable situations for my life. But here's what the scripture says this life leads to. Verse 8, it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. I love this, right? I love that thought, that it's healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Wow. I think that this kind of leaning into the sovereignty of God and understanding that God is in control of all things, whether it's blessing or whether it's judgment, that God is in control of all of those things as well, and he guides and leads through all of those moments of our life, that leaning into that actually provides the opposite effect of what we would think it would provide and bring within our life. Yes, it's going to be painful at times, and yes, it's going to be a struggle to just, I think, process through those moments as well. But the result of that for you and I is healing to our flesh, refreshment to our bones as well. It's a beautiful thing to realize that God is in control because God knows all things. He lives simultaneously, right? In the past, in the present, and the future. So it takes him out of all the elements of time that you and I understand in this world. He's not confined to any of that. He knows all of this. So I find great comfort and peace, and I find a refreshing and healing in knowing that God is sovereign over all things. It brings healing to my life when I live a life that I'm convinced that God is in control of all things. Because I have to know that. Why do we need to know that, Mark? Well, I'm glad you asked the question. You need to know that by what God is going to do with Saul. And that's important because I think that sometimes we hit this wall with Saul and we see God appointing him when God knows what's going to happen ultimately in the end, and we struggle with this, and we have to realize that we lean into the sovereignty of God. Verse 2 says this, and he had a son whose name was Saul as well. This is Kish. He had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. I want to talk about that for a moment with you. So here's my thought. A king fashioned like all the other nations. It's what they ask for. He's like the perfect model for a king. It's what he is. And in this you have to say, well, why does God give them what they want? Because I know that's not, they're being bad boys and girls. They should be in the corner. They shouldn't be getting what they want as well. If you have children, right, and your kids are not well-behaved a certain day, and I know none of you can relate to that with your kids, right? I never, ever. But yet, if you have kids that are not well-behaved and they come to you and they ask you for something, a treat or whatever, what do you tell them? You don't give it to them. Isn't that right? No. Some of you are looking at your spouse like they do right now, right? Yes. Yeah, because you do. Now, being a grandfather, it's a different rule book for me, right? Yes. It is, absolutely. So I officiated a wedding last night of James and Christy Peak now, which I'm excited. And they're on their honeymoon today, which is where they should be, right? I don't know, they should really be in church, but they're on their honeymoon, right? And so my two grandchildren were there with a lot of other kids as well. And Selah and Garrett were there. And they were getting a little rambunctious like they should as children as well. And so what does Papa do? Man, he goes and gets them rolls because they wanted a roll before anybody else. I go find the rolls and I bring them rolls. And when it comes cake time, I find them the two biggest pieces of cake because I want them jacked up to the max to send them home with Brad and Marcy, right? And there's no punishment for me. Correct? That's what they wanted. Papa gets what they want. That's it. That's it. And I'm not careless with that all the time, so don't think I am, okay? And you know what I mean. But I look at Israel and I think, wait a minute, come on. They don't need cake. No, they need time out, right? For about 500 years is what they need. They don't need that at all. But God says, give them what they want as well. And God doesn't just give them what they want. He fashions a king for them that would be the choice of any other king in any nation around them. He fashions this guy who would look like what you and I would think a king would look like. He's handsome. He's a head taller than anyone else in the nation as well. I think that is great. I don't know if they had an NBA in Israel, but he would probably play maybe. I'm not sure, right? And he's all of that and everything that you could want in that kind of king. So God even goes to that kind of detail as well. So God is attentive not to only detail in the blessing of our life, but God is also detailed in the judgment of your life. Because that's his heart. That's his heart. But this has always been important to Israel because here's the point, that they've always placed appearance at the expense of relationship. If you look at their history, if you go back to Numbers 13, the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, they said they fell like grasshoppers because they were so big. Yeah, if you look at other moments as well in their life, it's all about those kinds of things, and it's about that of appearance. In chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, it's about Goliath as well. Now they have a king, and a king looks like a king should look like as well. And God knows that, God remembers that, and he ultimately gives them what they want in detail to bring them back to him. That's it. Because here's the point. God knows that Israel has a lot of habits because they repeat these things over and over, year after year, hundreds of years after hundreds of years. So God knows that they have a habit of facing spiritual challenges with fleshly solutions. And can I tell you, when you face a spiritual challenge with a fleshly solution, that sometimes it works temporarily. If you look at the reign of Saul, as we're going to look at over the next few weeks together, then you're going to find that it temporarily does work, that Saul does win some great battles and Saul does some great things and God does use him really powerfully. But what we realize is in the end, in the long run, that it doesn't work. For the long game, it does not work at all. Absolutely, they've been there, but they're doing this again because their struggle has always been that they wanted to be like the nations that surround them. They want to trust in something other than God is what it has been. So God gives them what they want in detail, and he fashions them a king that could have been chosen by any of the nations around him. So Mark, if I'm single and I'm a single woman and I ask for a man that looks like Saul, then God is going to give me what I want, right? Is that what's going to happen? Is that going to happen? No, read the end of the story. It does not turn out well. Understand that. Don't place appearance over what is in their heart. And I think that's a huge thing to talk about as well. So you got to be careful in doing that. So God's not going to give me a 6'5" a guy that's young and handsome. He may give you a 5.5 footer. I don't know, right? That's maybe what he's going to give you. And then somebody's taking offense to that right now. Are you not? Yes, I know. It's okay. It's all right. And so I just use that as an example. So don't get upset with me through that process as well. But I think this is the thing, and that God is so attentive to detail in both blessing and judgment within our lives because it shows his heart for you and I, is what it does. Paul writes to you and I in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and here's what he says. He says, for this light momentary affliction, look what he says, is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. That what God does in our life, in the moments of struggle, in the moments whether it is something that we have brought maybe from on ourselves through a bad decision, or this is a judgment from God as well, both I think hand in hand, where God is disciplining us in our life as well. Understand that these things are working within my life to bring an eternal weight of glory beyond comparison. Realize that God is doing something powerful, so God does it in detail. I read this somewhere. I don't know who to cite for this quote, but it says, a faith that cannot be tested is one that cannot be trusted. Understand that. If you want faith in God, but you want a faith that cannot be tested within your life, don't ever trust that faith, is what it means. Because we're better eternally when we suffer temporally in this life. It makes us better eternally within this life. Saul's reign, understand this, as king of Israel, is the path to David's reign as the king of Israel. Understand that. God knows what he's doing as being sovereign. He does. And I think that when we face these kinds of crises within our life, we tend to look inward. And what Paul would say to us in that verse in Corinthians, look out. Look out is what he says. Look outside yourself to the sovereign and providential God. God, I don't understand what you're doing, but I trust you that you know what you're doing. Chapter 9 says this in verse 3, and we move on this morning. It says this, now the donkeys of Kish. I love the story because, again, it's a very common thing, but not random at all. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish said to Saul, his son, take one of the young men with you and arise and go and look for the donkeys. And he passed through the hill country of Ephraim, and he passed through the land of Shalishah, but they did not find them. And they passed through the land of Shalahim, but they did not find them there. And then they passed through the land of Benjamin, but they did not find them. And when they came to the land of Zeph, and I have to stop for a moment because I read to you way back in chapter 1, and we find that name Zeph there as well. And I think this is beautiful because what God randomly, or seems to be randomly, does in the greatest donkey hunt of all times, right? Yes, is he brings Saul and his servant to the town where Samuel lives. Well, they just happened to get there. No, they didn't. No, because God is sovereign and providential in all things. And Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys and becomes anxious about us." He's such a nice boy, isn't he? Isn't he? Yes, he is. But there are two sides to Saul. Don't throw rocks. There's two sides to you too. Okay, so we understand that, right? But he said to him, the servant says to him, but look what he says. "Behold, there is a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor. All that he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us the way we should go." So here's a thought, a sidebar sort of in a moment till we get to understanding Saul. God works through common events to do uncommon things in our life. God works through common events to do uncommon things in our life. Because this is not the first time that God has worked through a donkey. It is not the first time. If you go back to the book of Numbers, we find the story of Balaam, but there we have a talking donkey. We have lost ones here that are meant to be found that leads Saul and his servant to the town in which that of the region, and there the town of Ramah is where Samuel lives. But we find that God does use common events to do very uncommon things in our life. And here are two ways and two places that he uses a donkey. But in Numbers, he speaks through one, doesn't he? Yes, I love that text. God still speaks through donkeys as well today. And you know that. That's a joke. I don't know. I heard a preacher say that one time, but he used the King James version of the word for donkey is what he did, right? Now you are getting it, right? Yeah. Oh, Mark, I've said in church many times on the stage, there's been one of those speaking. Yeah, right. Yes. So moving on, okay? There we go. I had to explain it to y'all. You're so pure of mind that I had to break that down for you as well. Yes. Now some of you are going on your phone to the KJV to find out what it calls a donkey, right? So common is not common with God. Realize that. So let's move on. To understand Saul means never losing sight of his humanity. So here's where I think we have an introduction to who he is. To understand Saul means never losing sight of his humanity because we don't always end like we start. And that is the life of Saul for sure. And I think when we all relate to that as well. I think it's easy when you preach about Saul to vilify him from the very beginning. I think it's a very easy road to take with him as well. He has his issues, no doubt. And we're going to point out a few of those in a moment. But I think it's very easy to vilify him since you and I know the end as well. But to understand him over the next few weeks together in our study, then you have to live in the moment. You can't always go to the last chapter of the book and read about Saul. You have to live in the moment to see his life and see how it develops and see how God works and uses him as well. Because he's much like all of us in this room, that yet we have good qualities and we have not so good qualities as well. My dad always said, and this is a statement from my dad again as well. I think last week I used a few of them. So here's another one. Be careful throwing rocks when you live in a glass house, right? Be careful throwing rocks when you live in a glass house. So how many in the room have heard that before? If you ever heard that, raise your hand. Oh, pretty good, terrific. How many have never heard it? Raise your hand if you never heard it. Good, write it down, okay? Write that one down because I think that's a good one. I think that we approach Saul many times in teaching about him with that. We forget our own humanity, and that, again, causes us to be blind to his humanity as well. And in these verses, I think there's some things that we need to understand about him in order to frame him well over the next few weeks of our teaching. Look what it says as we read these verses back in chapter 9, verse 3 through 6. It says that he's concerned about his dad. It's like he has a heart for that as well. He does have a conscience for that as well. He was concerned that his father would miss him and afraid that something had happened to them. So he says, forget the donkeys. They can be replaced. Let's go back to my dad's house as well. I love it that when the servant says, let's find the prophet, then what does he say? He doesn't disagree with him at all. If you read later on, he says, yes, let's do that as well. In fact, he says we can't go to the prophet without a gift for the prophet. So he has some social graces as well to approach the prophet. So there are some good sides of Saul as well. I think that that's really a moment that we should sit in, and we should take note of those things. I think he's even has a greater understanding of some things, even than the elders do, because the elders come and demand from Samuel that he give them a king. He says that we should consult with the prophet as well. Yet in all that outward appeal, here's the thought. Saul lacked inward spiritual content. And that's the point I want you to see as we embark on this study together of Saul, that he lacked inward spiritual content. And that's the point. Yes, it doesn't mean that God doesn't use him. No, God uses him powerfully. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love Saul. No, God does love Saul. God works through him as well. Yet he lacks this inner spiritual content of his life. It's like having a book with a beautiful cover on the front and the back and is bound very well, but you open the book and the pages are empty. That's kind of like Saul's life. He lacks that. And I want to tell you today, as I relate that to where you and I are living, understand it's very easy to get there if you're not intentional not to get there. Does that make sense to you? That will happen by default in your life and my life, that you will absorb everything in this room as well, and you will keep it very surface within your life, and you'll know the language, and you'll know how to look, and you'll even know some things from the Bible to say as well, and you will know how to get here and to get back home on a Sunday morning. But yet, if you keep it on a surface level within your life, then you're like a book who has a great cover and a beautiful artwork on that cover, but yet when you open it, there's nothing on the pages. And that will happen by default in your life if you are not intentional to make sure it doesn't. Understand that this morning. So what does that have to do with Saul? Well, I want to show you something about Saul for a moment. We have to go back to chapter 3 and verse 20. Here's what it says. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. And if you read this passage these passages in verse chapter 9, when Saul gets to Samuel, he asks Samuel where he could find the seer. He asked him where he could find the seer, and he's in a town where the seer lives, which is the prophet, but he doesn't even know that. The thing about Saul is this: he doesn't even know who Samuel is. I think that's an interesting thought. When you look at chapter 3, all of Israel to Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord, but Saul doesn't know. He doesn't know that. Saul possesses a spiritual vision problem. He's spiritually blind is what he is. And we see that later on, the way he treats his own son, Jonathan, and Jonathan's relationship with David as well. And so what we realize is this, that this is Saul's issue as well, that one of many, that he doesn't even know who Samuel is as the prophet as well. And so he meets him. He asks him where to find the prophet. And he's talking to the prophet himself. So here is the thought this morning. Don't misjudge outward sensitivity with spiritual depth. From the outside, he looks the part. From the outside, he's handsome. He's young. He's a head taller than everyone else in the kingdom as well. And he's sensitive about his own father. He says, yes, let's go find the seer as well. But he has no spiritual depth within his life. He doesn't even know who he is. So don't misjudge outward sensitivity with spiritual depth. He's a nice guy. He's worried about his dad. But what about his heart and his relationship with his God as well? I think that's a huge huge thing to think through when it comes to Saul's life as well. But God has promised Israel a king. And God keeps that promise. We see this happening in Saul's life, even as Saul passes through the gate of the city and he's near Samuel, but he doesn't know it. And through all of this, God is with Saul. Can I show you something? Jumping forward for a moment to chapter 10, it's verse 9. And it says, when he, talking about Saul, turned his back to leave Samuel, he has found Samuel. Samuel has taken him to a banquet, a great meal. He spends the night at Samuel's house. He sleeps on the roof, which is the best room in the house because that's where it's the coolest overall. And the next day, when he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. I looked at this and I thought, this is amazing. Talking about Saul, God gave him another heart. And all these signs came to pass that day. And when they came to Gibeah, behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of the God rushed upon him, talking about Saul, and he prophesied among them. Verse 11, and when all who knew him previously saw how he prophesied with the prophets, the people said to one another, what has come over the son of Kish? Something has changed, right? This is a donkey herder. And here, all of a sudden, something is different about him. Is Saul also among the prophets? And what we realize is this, that God empowers Saul. Yes, God empowers Saul for a very specific task, just like God empowers Samson in the book of Judges. He does the same thing to Saul, because understand this, really, this is more about God than this is about Saul. This is more about God's heart for his people and his love for his rebellious people. Even when they want a king, and God says, it's not my timing, and you can't have a king, or you shouldn't have a king like all the other nations, yet it still expresses the heart for his rebellious people, and rebellious people like you and I as well. And so God empowers Saul on their behalf. He's not changed his mind about Israel and him having a king. He's not recounted on his heart for his nation at all. That's not the issue yet, but it's about his heart for his people. And so he empowers Saul for that moment. God is present in Saul's life. And those who know him in the past can see that. So back to chapter 9, verse 14, and Allison, you can play while I start reading this text as well, because if you don't, there's a lot to talk about, and I can't keep you all day, but I want to read these verses to you this morning. So they went up to the city, and as they're returning to the city, this is Saul and his servant. They saw Samuel coming out toward them on their way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, tomorrow about this time, I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be, I have to stop for a moment, because we always said, Hope Fellowship, that context is everything. So you have to look at the words to get the context of what is happening here. And he said, he shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, but going back, and you shall anoint him to be prince. So I thought, well, maybe this is just a misprint, right? Because I'm thinking that he's king. But God uses the word prince. So God is not discounting Samuel as being king of Israel, but he's qualifying his position as saying, you're king, but you are not ultimate authority. You answer to a greater authority, and that's me. You see, that's the sovereignty of God. That when we are disobedient, when we make our own choices, that God does not step away from us and fold his arms and say, so my hands are not in your life any longer. You're going to float through this life on your own. And I'm going to revoke my presence from you. God is establishing the relationship that you are to appoint him as prince because there's an ultimate king, and that is me. He said that you shall appoint him as prince over my people Israel, and he shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines. God is rushing upon him like he did Samson for a purpose. For I have seen my people because their cry has come to me. It's about his heart. And when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall, and again, look at the word, restrain my people. He doesn't use a word that perhaps we think would be appropriate for that. He uses the word restrain. It's a word that leaves us with a negative connotation. That he's going to be a ruler, but he's going to be a ruler like the other nations. God always, and hear me today on this Reformation Sunday, that God always remains true to his position and posture as king. Understand that. Saul might be king of Israel, but he answers to God through Samuel the prophet. God never steps away and surrenders control of your life. Trust him. He is sovereign. So I thought through this a lot. And I found a verse in chapter 12 of 1 Samuel. You say, Mark, you've kind of been back and forth this morning. I know. Go home and read chapters 9 and 10 on your own. But here's what it says, and this is where we close together. For the Lord will not forsake his people. Chapter 12, verse 22. For the Lord will not forsake his people. For his great name's sake. Did you know that God doesn't love us because we're lovable? Did you know that? I think that's something that you have to wrap your mind around. That God does not love you because you are lovable. Well, my husband loves me and my wife loves me. Good, I'm glad. And that's the way it's supposed to work. Yeah, my parents love me. I'm good. That's the way it's supposed to work. The person sitting next to me, I don't know who they are. I've never met before, but I'm sure they love me. And you might want to ask them. No, don't ask him that, right? But yet, I understand that. But what I realize about our love and human love, and I have to hurry, is that our love has limits. And the best love in this world can be destroyed. It can be. So if God structured his love for you and I on the condition that we are lovable, we're in trouble, right? For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake. Because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people for himself. So here's the thought as we get ready to pray. God knew Israel when he chose them because he's sovereign. God knew them when he chose them. And yet, it still pleased him to make them his people. What a thought. Can I take that another step? God loved Saul even when he knew him. Yes. Can I take it another step? Mark, we know where you're going. God knew you before you were ever formed, and he is pleased to call you his people. Isn't that an amazing thought? I wrote this in my journal this week. God knew that when he invited us to his table, that we would fight for the best seat of prominence. There's a parable about that, isn't there? We study that this summer. That we would eat more than our share and then complain about how it tastes. God knew. And then when we got up to leave the table, that we would steal his silverware. God knew. He knew that about us. He knew that we were wicked and sinful, yet is pleased that we are his. So in light of that, for those moments when you think life is really hard and it's painful, and I don't understand what God is doing in my life right now, and why doesn't God make all of that just end? Or I asked God for something and God gave it to me, and now I want to give it back to him, right? I don't want that in my life. Why is God having me to walk this path? Because it's pleased him that you are his. So he will place your well-being, he will place your health spiritually, mentally, emotionally. He will place those things in your life over your comfort. Because it pleases him that you're his. He loves you. Even though he knows that you'll fight for the best seat, when that's not the seat that you should sit in. And you will eat everything that you can eat at his table and then complain about it. He knows. And when you leave, you will take things that you shouldn't take. He knows us. But yet he's committed through his sovereignty in your life and my life to do the very best for you. That's God. You will never understand Saul well outside of looking at him through the lens of sovereignty. Trust God in your life this morning. Trust him. So can I pray with you and pray for you for a moment? Just take a position of prayer, however that is for you. And let me pray with you. So Lord, we're thankful for your goodness this morning. God, we're thankful that you meet us where we are in life, not where you wish we were. Father, we are reminded of your great love in both that of blessing and judgment. That how you are detailed, Father, to make sure that every base is covered for our well-being, so that ultimately we grow in you and we're closer to you and we have a greater understanding of you in our life. Father, help us today to live convinced that you are sovereign over all things and trust you, Lord, in these moments of our life. So, Father, we find in the middle of that kind of trust, refreshment for our lives, healing for our lives, God. We find encouragement even when the path is still being walked. So, Lord, today we surrender our worry and our care to you. God, you know us well, and we'll pick it back up again But we surrender to you, Father, knowing that you know what you're doing. And ultimately, it is always for our good. So Father, we trust you. We trust you today emphatically. Thank you, Father. Speak to our hearts and our minds by your Spirit this morning and change us in your name. Amen.